Sadiq Khan, thank you very much for joining us on LBC. Can I just start by asking you for what your biggest triumph of the last 5 years has been as Mayor of London?
There's a few things I'm really proud of. I'm proud of the way our city's come together. We've stayed united not just during the last 14 months, but in terrorist attacks in 2017, the Grenfell Tower fire of our city, and other things that affected our city, not least Brexit. As far as personal achievements are concerned, I'm incredibly proud that we've reduced toxic air in the centre of London by almost a half, across London by by more than a third, the world's first ultra-low emission zone. We froze fares for 5 years, saving the average London household £200, at the same time bringing in the night tube and the hopper bus fare used in more than 500 million journeys. Last year we began building more council homes than any year since 1983. The year before, more council homes than any year since 1984. In the last year when Boris Johnson was mayor, only 3 social rent homes begun, only zero council homes. We began more than 7,000 last year. In relation to the serious concern that many of us have had for a number of years around serious youth violence, we've managed to invest in the police more than £1 billion, 1,000 extra police officers, but also invested in young Londoners. More than 110,000 young Londoners have constructed things to do in education, culture and sports, which has seen a reduction in youth violence, a reduction in knife crime under 25, a reduction in burglary, a reduction in moped crime, a reduction in gun usage and violence as well. So proud of those things, but the thing I'm really proud of is standing up for our values, whether against Donald Trump, whether against Brexit or whether against Boris Johnson.
You began your mayoralty with no less than three terrorist attacks. You've had the pandemic to cope with. How much of your time as mayor has actually been dictated by events and not necessarily given you the freedom as the Mayor of London to push through your agenda? And do you feel that that means that there's work to do on the other side of this election if you're successful?
Look, over the last 5 years, not only have I had to deal with 3 different prime ministers, we've had things nobody could have predicted, whether it's Brexit, whether it's the terror attacks, whether it's the awful fire at Grenfell, whether it's further austerity. That's part and parcel of being the Mayor of London.
Has it made it more difficult?
Oh, without a doubt, we've had a pandemic for the last 14 months with a delayed election. But when you compare and contrast my 5 years as Mayor, the first versus the first 5 years of any of the previous 2 mayors, you'll see how much we've achieved. But also we've laid the foundations now, because when I became Mayor, I inherited a mess. No plans to fix the housing crisis, no plans to address the poor quality air, no plans to invest in young Londoners, police service being cut again and again and again, nothing in the intro in relation to ideas for how to solve London's problems. And over the last 5 years we've made huge progress, and so the foundations are now there so we can have a rapid recovery once the lockdown restrictions are eased.
Do you mind me asking, do you think it's going to be harder to make the mayoralty relevant in the next 3 years, because the pandemic means TfL's finances have suffered? You're now more reliant on central government. You're going to have to move from City Hall out to the Crystal in the docks in East London. Does that make it, or is that going to make it harder to stay relevant in London and to do what you might want to do as the mayor, particularly as the man in number 10 doesn't like you much?
Well, I think once the election is out of the way, some of the
And if you're successful?
Some of the knockabout party politics stuff that takes place will be gone. Let's be frank, some of the stuff that both Boris Johnson and some of his ministers have been saying, and his advisors, are motivated by the election. Once that's out of the way, I'm sure we can work closely together.
Do you think you could be more constructive? Because it's been, ever since Boris Johnson's come in, there seems to be more tension between you, because at the beginning of your mayoralty you actually got on quite well with David Davis, the Brexit Secretary. There was at least some conversation. You didn't like Chris Grayling much, the Transport Secretary, as I remember. But now it seems that you're at loggerheads at every turn with central government.
Well, I think Boris Johnson's clearly worried about his legacy as mayor. He's now seeing what a proper mayor can do. But secondly, obviously, he feels threatened by me. That's for him to explain why it takes it so personally. But I think genuinely after the election things will calm down, because the government realises you can't have a national recovery without a London recovery. And they're in danger of cutting their nose to spite their face. We contribute annually about £40 billion more to the Treasury than we take out. And if the government wants London to be firing all cylinders, they've got to be supporting London. That means both Transport for London, and by the way, the only reason TfL has financial challenges is because of the pandemic. I'm the guy that reduced the deficit given to me by Boris Johnson by more than 71%. I'm the guy that increased our cash balances by more than 13%. At the same time, as free and fair. So the government realises they need to work with us, and I'm sure once the election's out of the way, they'll start being sensible.
Just on that, do you think there's an issue? Because Boris Johnson has always said he wants to level up, he wants to give more to the north, to the red wall seats, and in that narrative, London loses, doesn't it? And do you think that actually, because of the way Boris Johnson has focused so heavily the government's efforts on the north of England, that actually London's going to miss out looking ahead, to the 2024 election?
Well, we know because we have Boris Johnson on record, and he was mayor, saying things like, the way to make our country more equal is not to make London poorer. And this is another example of politicians seeking to divide communities, dividing the country to win votes. And the point I make to the government in a courteous, polite way is the way to make our country more equal is not to make London poorer, but it's to give more powers and resources to all parts of the country, including London, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, Bristol, and dare I say it, Wales and Scotland as well. It's really important for the government to realise that actually, rather than trying to divide London versus the rest of the country, it should be London and the rest of the country working together to ensure we have a proper recovery after this pandemic. But also, we potentially have a perfect storm of Brexit and the pandemic. That's why the government's going to work with us to ensure we don't have a repeat of the 1980s, which is mass unemployment, leading to a generation written off.